Welcome to today's Knowledge Sharing Forum, brought to you by Natural Hazards Research Australia. My name is Paula Dootson. I'm an Associate Professor here at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. And as we begin our session together today, I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara as First Nations owners of the lands on where QUT stands. I pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits, and acknowledge that these lands have always been a place of teaching, learning, and research. And I welcome any First Nations people joining us here today. I also welcome anyone else who would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on where they're joining from in the chat function. We have an excellent lineup of speakers today. We have Professor Jeanette Sutton, who's based out of New York at the University of Albany, but is dialing in today from California, a much better time zone to join us from. We also have Kia Wall from Google and Dr. Karen O'Connor from Earth Fire Alliance, both joining us from Sydney and Melbourne. We have Annie Fordham, CF, who's joining us from Department of Fire and Emergency Services in Western Australia. And myself, I will be a speaker today, and also Joachim Luther joining us from the World Meteorological Organization out of Singapore. The order of presentations today is entirely by time zone design, and every speaker has 20 minutes of time. Some speakers will take that 20 minutes, others might take a little bit less, and that will allow some time for questions. Now, if you have a question throughout any of the presentations today, please can you pop those in the Q&A box. So there's a chat box and then a Q&A box. Pop the questions in the Q&A, and where there's time, we can field those questions. And where there's not time, we're going to answer those questions offline. And in a post-event wrap-up, when we send you the recording, we'll also send you answers to any of the questions that you provide today. If you have any technical issues, please can you pop them in the chat function, and the wonderful Via and Joe from Natural Hazards Research Australia will help troubleshoot those for you. If we all have tech issues and something goes terribly wrong, just stand by and we will work to resolve that as quickly as possible. It's now my pleasure to hand over for an official welcome to today's forum. I'm going to hand over to Natural Hazards Research Australia CEO, Andrew Gissing, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what NHRA is doing here in Australia and the impact that it's having. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you, Paula, and really great to see everybody online. And I think what an impressive job Paul and the team have done to assemble some great speakers. And thanks for those that have agreed to speak at the knowledge sharing this morning. I'm really excited. Hopefully I'll be able to stay for the full period and hear everybody speak. But I just want to, just in terms of my introductory remarks, really talk a bit about the Centre and some of the work that we've been doing that aligns to this project. But I think this project is super exciting. Like folks will know that we have an end user driven approach to our research investments, and this one's being put forward by our research end users from the AFAC Public Information and Warnings group, who are really leading public information and warnings across our country, and are in need of research that shows that the future and helps to realise future ambition. And we really call that Be Ahead of Ready in our centre. Some of you will have heard us talk about the concept about Be Ahead of Ready, really thinking about future transformational change in the disaster risk reduction sector as we face climate change and we face increasing exposure, increasing vulnerability of our communities. And at the centre we've got this true mission about building safer, more resilient and sustainable communities. And we do that through research and science, which is impactful, which is ultimately useful, usable, and used. But just a few reflections, firstly, from some of our research that I think is relevant to this particular project so far, particularly some of our post-event research that we've recently completed after the devastating floodings that occurred across the country in 2022. I think a key finding of a lot of that, in my mind, really comes back to this whole thing that warnings are about people. And it's really good that this research project is taking that as a central position, and that really legislation frameworks and capability really need to support a people-centered approach to warnings. I think there's some really good post-event research that really helps to unpack some of the behaviours which have been occurring. For example, communities after the floods, they've said that the warnings were difficult to understand because of the terminology used. That also that they wanted things like accurate and live data there as well. That was really important to them. There's also obviously the growth and the use of social media and how people are using social media. We've also done some good work just recently post Cyclone Alfred there as well. We've also done some research about what emergency managers say, and you can find that on our website as well. And the sort of information that emergency managers are saying that they need to make better decisions, also to be able to provide warnings to communities in the future there also. I think the other key thing there is about future challenges and opportunities also. The research that has been done post-event certainly showing, perhaps this erosion of trust in institutions. We're seeing sources of local information, particularly from family and friends and neighbours, being most trusted by communities, and some of the official sources being lower down the list. And you can find all this research on our website. Some great work, in particular this graph here from the folks at RMIT that have done the work in Victoria, South Australia and southern New South Wales. I think the other key challenge that we face with climate change, we see this particularly in floods like Lismore and more recently in Taree in May this year, is about communicating extreme events, communicating to people that have never actually experienced these sort of natural hazards before. They might live on the outer reaches of the floodplain, or might live in an area that they don't think is prone to natural hazards, and they're experiencing them. And how can we be communicating and designing our future platforms to enable communication to these people, to convince them about events that they have not experienced before. I also think about things like things that might be gaps in our warning systems. I think the Texas flash floods this year have shown that perhaps we have some gaps in our warning systems for flash flooding here in Australia as well, but also opportunities. And I think the technologies that are available these days, particularly, be able to bring about personalised and interactive warnings in the future. I get really inspired when I look at the work that somebody like Dr. Sally Potter's been doing in New Zealand about talking about personalised warnings. And I know that some of that's a bit challenging and got to work through some of the AI ethics around that, but that's really sort of exciting thinking about what warnings could be looking like into the future. And then just finally, just a few plugs for the centre there as well. So we've got our workshop grants that are out there at the moment. That please go to the centre's website, naturalhazards.com.au, and you can find more about our workshop grants that are being offered now as well. Also, forums coming up in Adelaide in June next year. So again, we're expected to be a sellout. We'll open registrations before Christmas. So please mark the dates in your diary. And again, those dates are there on our website. And also the disaster challenge is coming up next month. I was going to say next week, but not quite there. Next month in October, and again, that'll be a great event. So keep in touch with this project. I really commend this project, and I really commend the work of the researchers in bringing this together. But keep in touch with the centre, subscribe to our newsletter, and we look forward to seeing you at many more events, and really excited about today. So back to you, Paula.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate that you're spending your busy day with us today. So now it is my absolute pleasure to get straight into the programming. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Jeanette Sutton. So Jeanette specialises in disaster and risk communication with a primary focus on public alerts and warnings disseminated via short messaging channels. Her current work centres on message design and testing across a range of hazards via wireless emergency alerts and other alerting channels. She recently led the research design and training and implementation of the FEMA IPAWS message design dashboard, where she and her team developed lexicons and workflows for 48 hazards, plus all clear and missing person messages. She's an associate professor at the University of Albany and is the founder of the Warn Room, which provides evidence-based advice on effective alert and warning messages. I refer to her as the Queen of Disaster Comms Research. Jeanette, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm even more pleased that I'm on California time, which is a few hours earlier than I would be if I was in New York tonight. But it's really a pleasure to join you and to talk about emergency alerting in the US, and talking a little bit about our present challenges and some future opportunities. When Paula reached out to me to participate in this event, she gave us a charge. And there were two key questions that she asked that I can address from my perspective. The first one was, how are platforms used around the world in the US? What works, what doesn't, and why? So I'm going to speak about that, relating to our research on what we know about the use of wireless emergency alerts in the US, and talk a little bit about research that we just published on over alerting. And then the second question was, what does the future look like for public information and warnings? And I want to share with you the tools that we've been building that are now available to improve our alerts and warnings. And that was work that was done under our research with FEMA in the US. So the first challenge that we have is getting the message out. This is an image that represents what we call the warning response model, which was a model that was built by Dennis Moletti and John Sorensen and published in 1990. And with my dear friend and colleague, Erica Kuligowski, we gave it a name a few years ago because it didn't have a good name. We're now referring to it as the warning response model. And essentially, it lays out the pathway for a message to initiate action, beginning with messages received, moving through a series of message perceptions, and leading to some sort of a behavioral response, hopefully a protective action. And then the message perceptions that are listed below the head outline the different things that people engage in as they're making sense of the contents of the message and of the environment around them. They have to understand the message, personalize it, believe the message, and make a decision about what to do in response to the message they receive. And they do this in a very social environment of looking around and confirming with their peers, friends, colleagues, and also the environment. And we call that milling. Getting the message out is a challenge. This is a diagram that shows the various kinds of channels that are available, which are incorporated all over the world. And if you see, the arrow on the side shows my perception of the use of these different channels based upon increased urgency and severity of the threat. At the bottom, of course, is the websites, social media, and traditional media, things that are employed at the local level and communicating to local audiences, but can go much more broadly than local. And hopefully your local organization has a following that's already paying attention to the messages that are being produced over social media or through their web pages, so that people know how to find you and find authoritative and credible information. The second channel is opt-in alerts, systems that are purchased by the local organizations that people can then sign up to receive text messages, emails, or phone calls through voice. And then we elevate to the level of the integrated public alert and warning system. And here we have wireless emergency alerts and the emergency alert system. And these in the US are, they are opt-out. So you are automatically signed into this system when you purchase a phone that is WIA enabled. And unless you turn your alerts off, you are already engaged and will receive a message for events that are perceived by the local alerting authority to be imminent, or rise to the level of public safety where you need to receive that information to take action. Above that is sirens, which of course alert outdoors and can alert indoors also, but generally we think of them as being outdoors. And then the most touch heavy is door knocking, going door to door. So what's wonderful about these is they can be layered on top of each other, depending on how severe the threat is and the urgency of getting the information out. So if you're issuing a wireless emergency alert, you might also be issuing messages through text, email, and voice, as well as utilizing all of the other channels below, the website, social media, and traditional media. So these are all wonderful strategies to get information out, but they also come with a cost. So recently, with my colleague Michelle Wood at the California State University Fullerton, we conducted a study to try and understand better when people say over alerting, what do they mean? And what we learned is that over alerting consists of multiple dimensions, and each dimension has a series of definitions. Alerting fatigue has a series of dimensions. And there are a series of consequences or outcomes related to fatigue and over alerting. But I want to highlight the over alerting consequences, or the categories of over alerting and how that relates to messaging. Over alerting related to geography. When messages go far beyond the area of impact, or people are outside of the area where the alert is issued, and so people believe that the messages have over alerted because they've gone beyond the geography. Relevancy is related to whether or not the threat applies directly to me and if I should be taking action. Also, if a message is actionable, that it actually gives me instructions on what to do. And if that information is missing, if the contents do not include actionable information, the contents are incomplete, the contents are confusing, using jargon and information that's not easily understood, those things all fit into this idea of feeling like you're over alerted. And in the future, we hope to link over alerting to fatigue and consequences. What's important about thinking about these categories of over alerting is that when we know that when people feel over alerted, they also tend to want to opt out. And the greatest threat to opting out that we've seen is from this one study that was conducted by the RAND Corporation in 2023 following our national test of the Wireless Emergency Alert Service. And what they found was that the one state that issues the most statewide alerts, and those messages are issued for amber alerts, so a missing person alert, that is the place where you have the most opt-outs, which is directly related to the geography, whether or not the message should be issued across an entire state. The state of Texas is very, very large. And whether or not the message is relevant to everyone across that state, as well as whether or not an amber alert is an actionable warning message that requires people to take action to protect themselves. Also, contents in messages, when messages do not provide complete information, that is also a threat to opting out. And we've also heard that the sound of a wireless emergency alert is quite disturbing and it causes people to turn it off, especially if they issue that in the middle of the night. So we know how to address one of those pieces for sure. And the second challenge that I'm going to address very briefly is writing a good message. We have been studying alerts and warnings for well over 5 decades in the US and internationally also with partners in Australia, New Zealand, Japan. And we know how messages should be written. In fact, we've now published several documents that are tools that can be used to write good messages. The first document I want to reference is this particular one called The Complete Message is the Best Message, which studied how messages are formatted using the structure that we advocate for here, and how they compare to the standard of practice across the US. And we found that the structure advocated through our research far outperforms the standard of practice structure of a message that's utilized by alerting authorities in the US. So this is the first document that I want to point you to, and you can see that the way that the message is written is going to be similar from one to the next as I show them to you. In this case, the source comes first, followed by the hazard type, the location, the time, and statement about what the hazard is doing, followed by protective action guidance, and linking people to where a URL so they can get additional information about the threat and about what they can do to protect themselves. The second complete message that we know about is a post-alert message. And in this case, it's how to end an event, similar to what you would call an all clear message. And in this case, recently published was an article called Are We Safe Yet?, where we conducted an experimental analysis of emergency post-alert messages and found that people are least satisfied with not getting a message that closes that communication loop, and they're most satisfied with messages that tell them that the hazard is no longer threatening and gives them specific instructions about being able to resume prior behaviors, return to an area, or conclude action, and then adding new guidance about what people can do as they re-enter the area that they've left or come out of their shelter that they've been sheltering in. A third kind of complete message is for missing persons. And this article was recently published in Police Practice and Research. And this morning we spoke to people with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children about this research. And this very similar structure where we followed the same warning response model structure for missing person message, where it starts with the source, followed by the threat, which is in this case a missing child, adult, or older adult, followed by a description of the person who is missing, the location they were last seen and the time, and then the guidance about what to do if you find the person. And you can add instructions about how to help to find the person also. But you see that these things are all very similar in their structure. And that's because we did a great deal of research following the work of Dennis Milletti and John Sorensen in thinking about how the warning response model should be utilized to structure all of our messages for all kinds of threats. And so we have additional tools that can be utilized for writing a good message, where we developed 2 different lexicons. And this is where you can find the contents that are necessary for building those 3 kinds of messages that I just talked about. The first one is called the Warning Lexicon, and this is available to you to freely download from the Natural Hazards Review. We paid for it to be open access, and so people around the world are utilizing it, and we're very happy about that. The second one is called the Post-Alert Message Lexicon, and that is now in press with the Natural Hazards Review, and as soon as it is available, I'll be sharing that broadly. Both of these have 48 different hazards in them. They include the contents to describe the hazard impact, as well as the contents for the protective actions that go along with each hazard. Another tool for writing a good message is to visit my website, which is called The Warn Room, and to look at the blog posts that I create, where I take an existing authentic wireless emergency alert and I apply the lessons from the warning response model to the message and show how tweaks to the content, the structure, and the style can improve it. And it's all based in the evidence of our research from multiple decades. And another tool is to follow me on LinkedIn, and you can find my information right there at Jeanette Sutton. So the last part that we were charged with was talking about what does the future look like. We've identified the dimensions for over-alerting, and we can start to think about how to use those dimensions to affect alerting policy. But what we haven't yet done is linked together the experience of over-alerting directly to the decision to opt out or the decision to remain enrolled in messaging. And when we can make the connection between people's experiences, their risk perceptions, their feelings of fatigue, the timing of the alerts that they receive, the sound that they experience, all of those things interconnected with one another, we might be able to identify the strategies to reduce people's decisions to opt out. So that's the first thing that I'd look to the future to be able to do. The second thing is thinking about end-to-end systems that include not just warnings, not just the technology, but link all of those things together, where we have monitoring and modeling and messaging working together rather than in silos. And I have a partnership that I did with Greenstream and with FloodMap. FloodMap is an Australian-based company, and the Warn Room, where we worked with a county in Virginia to help to install monitoring systems, linking that data to FloodMap's modeling. And then as the model identified the forecast and the nowcast, messages that were designed using our best practices and research were connected directly to the data that FloodMap was creating. And the last thing I want to mention is artificial intelligence, because this is coming fast, and we're watching the creation of new tools that are emerging very quickly. I am currently an advisor to a group called EM1, and they're integrating all of the research that we've been doing on alerts and warnings into their platform. And I'm excited to see the possibilities as things continue to grow, but I'm also very, very skeptical. And until we have demonstrated that it can be accurate when it needs to be accurate, which is anytime a person's life is at risk, I won't be advocating for it. But we're going to see a lot of emergence in the next years. I believe that I now have maybe 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left for questions and comments. Here's my contact information, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. So we had a question come through about what is your approach? How do you deal with people who have turned off WIA before you went through and talked at length about it? So I suppose if there was anything else you wanted to add, or have you ever seen that people come back and opt back in as well?
So that's part of the study that we want to do next. We actually want to talk to people who have chosen to opt out and also people who have chosen to remain enrolled. And it may be that somewhere in there we'll find that there might be people who have chosen to re-enroll. Even as we were doing the survey with the public about their choices to opt out, some people wrote in their open-ended responses, well, now that you've given me the idea to re-enroll, I'm going to. So it may be that people need to know a better public education campaign around the benefits of utilizing these systems. And we know that every time a new seasonal hazard emerges, right, hurricane season, tornado season, flash flood season, dust storm season, the National Weather Service puts out messages to say, make sure you have multiple ways to be alerted. And they always emphasize the need for people to check to make sure their wireless emergency alerts are turned on.
Yeah, thank you. We had another question come in. Are complete messages universal, global, or do different cultures, countries, nationalities require similar research to establish an effective message for that area?
People are people. We always have very similar questions. We want to know who the message is from to establish credibility. We want to know what the hazard is that you're telling us to take an action for. You can't just say evacuate now and people will just say, oh, okay, I'll evacuate. They need to know what that particular threat is doing in order to make a good decision about where to evacuate to or to shelter, how to shelter. They need to know where that event is occurring. Is it occurring near me or far away? Some estimate of the timing of the threat. And then they really need to know, what do I do to protect myself? Now, maybe there are cultures that need something more, but I can't imagine that they need anything less. And in the absence of that information, we know that people go looking for it, and that's what delays people's actions. It may be that some cultures need the information to be arranged a little bit differently. So perhaps the source goes at the end, or the time goes at the end, and the action goes at the front. And so restructuring a message may be a little bit different, but the contents themselves, those are the questions that people have. And that was built upon decades of studies to build the initial warning response model. And then we've tested it going forward for decades.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. No less, but maybe more.
Maybe more.
I'm going to sneak in a final question here. So can you discuss over alerting because of geography in a little bit more detail?
Yeah. So geography is for our system, for wireless emergency alerts, you can draw a polygon of where the threat is occurring somewhere within that box. And you might be on the outside of the box, but for some reason there's a bleed over. And so it gets you. So you've been over alerted because you're not within the range of the threat. It could be also that you are within the range of the threat, but you're on the other side of the polygon. And so it's related to this kind of distance away from the event. But over alerting does not necessarily mean it was a false alert. And that's an important thing to recognize, because when the initial work was done on Cry Wolf and they talked about a false alert, they were talking about messages where it was incorrect. But Joe Traynor and his colleagues at the University of Delaware studied false alerts related to tornadoes. And when people might call something a false alert because it didn't hit, but it wasn't false for somebody else. So they may have felt over alerted, but it's not because it was necessarily false.
Mm,
So
yeah.
there's a distinction between the two things that I think we have to be very clear when we think about it. And much of this we can overcome by creating good, clear, complete messages. And that location information relative to the geography of the threat becomes very important, because that's where you identify whether or not you are truly at risk and need to take action.
Excellent. Thank you. We have other questions, but I'll field them to you and we'll take those offline. Thank you so much for your time, Jeanette. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's good. It's a little bit earlier than if you're in New York.
It is great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we are going to move on to our next presentation, which is actually a joint presentation. So we're very lucky to have Kia Wall and Dr. Karen O'Connor joining us. We're going to start with Kia first. Kia is the head of Search and Gemini partnerships for Google Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. With 17 years at Google, she focuses on search and social impact integrations. Throughout her career at Google, Kia has worked across a variety of business areas and regions, including search, YouTube, marketing, and commercial strategy. She currently manages content partnerships, integrations, and crisis response features within the partnerships team.
Thanks, Paula. Hi, everyone. As Paula said, I am Kia, and I'm delighted to meet you virtually. I manage search and assistant partnerships across Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. And I'm here today to talk about how we alert people across our platforms during times of crisis. So supporting people with authoritative information during times of crisis is a critical part of our business and a core element of our team's mission. Our goal is really simple. We want to reach everyone impacted by a crisis with the right information, and we want to do this by collaborating with the ecosystem. And to those of you here who we already work with, a huge thank you for all your efforts over the years. We use our key platforms, Search and Maps. As I'm sure you all know, these reach millions of people worldwide, and these help us to raise awareness during times of crisis. So the core mechanisms for distribution are public alerts and SOS alerts. But beyond these tools, we really focused on research to drive innovation in this space. And Karen will share an exciting update and example on that in a little bit. So I'm sure you are all familiar with these public alerts and SOS alerts, but essentially public alerts draw information directly from the authorities. And these allow us to display warning messages directly on Search and Maps, and also to send notifications during a crisis or emergency. So at a global level, we use public alerts for various events, but in Australia, we only have the necessary data to use public alerts for bushfires. Where we don't have the data for public alerts, we show SOS alerts, and these trigger against all kinds of emergencies globally. These are created and curated by Google and provide fast access to the most important and relevant resources, all consolidated into one place. And here on the slide, you'll see some examples of what these look like. They also help us to show alerts on maps in navigational areas and instances. We're constantly focused on improving the visuals for all of our alerts so that people can quickly understand the potential impact on their location. And in Australia and many other countries across the world, we now use satellite imagery to show bushfire boundaries. And this is shown alongside our public alerts. This gives users both the official warning messages from the authorities, as well as an understanding of the actual area impacted. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, research is the cornerstone of all of our work. And FireSat is an excellent example of this. Earlier this year, with support from Google.org, Earth Fire Alliance and Muon Space launched the first FireSat proto-satellite. With that, I'll hand over to Karen to share more details about this groundbreaking work.
So Dr. Karen O'Connor has more than 20 years experience driving scientific change at scale. She's designed and led science and technology programs for defense, both here in Australia and in the US, the CSIRO and the Minderoo Foundation. Karen is currently a founding principal of the Earth Fire Alliance, a global nonprofit aiming to provide high-fidelity fire data. equitably on a global scale. Her position is Strategic Development and International Relations. She is also a founder of Giant Leap Futures and Innovation Consultancy. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, Paula, and thanks, Kia. Really grateful to be part of this conversation. It's so interesting from my point of view, and so grateful for the relationship with Google Research and Google.org alongside our other partners who've been really there since the beginning in the development of this project and before we even stood up the Earthfire Alliance. So what are we aiming to do? Well, we really want to usher in a new era of global fire monitoring. We think that there's an opportunity here that we wouldn't have had a decade ago. And I think if we do it in a decade's time, it'll likely be too late. Space-based capabilities have reached a point where they're now affordable to be able to really create new fit-for-purpose systems to monitor for fire. So what is the Earthfire Alliance? Well, as Paula and Kia hinted, we are a global community-led nonprofit organization. And really, our commitment is to delivering transformative real-time data on all wildfires on Earth so that we can change our collective approach to how we work with fire. And as they mentioned, FireSat really is our flagship program. It's a space-based fire detection system. We're aiming for a full constellation of FireSats that will provide timely and trustworthy wildfire information. I feel like trust has been a comment that's come through a few of the presentations today, and really give a new data source to those agencies and organizations that are responsible for warning communities around the world. So what does the system look like? Well, it was designed with and for fire experts, and we interviewed 200 experts in the field, from on-ground incident commanders to on-ground frontline fire experts through to climate scientists and fire modelers. And what we heard was that what was needed for trustworthy information from satellites is that it had to be high resolution, it had to be near real time, and it had to be trustworthy. And so what we have designed based on that input is a system that will have an 80-meter average resolution pixel size on a global scale. So that means that we'll be able to see higher resolution than a lot of the satellite systems that are available right now. The satellite systems that have been used historically by the fire community, like MODIS and VEERS, while they are amazing systems, they weren't purpose-built for this, and so they don't really look at fire at the resolution that we're talking about. The second piece is the agencies wanted to be able to see fire as early as possible. It's important that agencies have time to make decisions and time to warn communities as quickly as possible from the moment those fires are ignited. And so with our system and the analytics that we are looking to build, we believe we'll be able to see a fire as small as 5 by 5 meters and be able to warn that hotspot or provide that hotspot information to fire agencies who can warn communities. And we're aiming for a 20-minute global revisit. You know, the information is all well and good, but if it's not real time, it's not useful for decision making on an operational from an operational perspective. So we're aiming to have enough satellites in the sky that every region in the world will be able to see every fire every 20 minutes. And that's a big endeavor. It's quite an audacious goal, but we do believe that it's achievable. And then the last piece that was requested by the experts was that it's trustworthy. You know, there's a lot of false positives with satellite-based information because it hasn't been built for this, doesn't have the resolution, but we're aiming to reduce the false positives to as close to 5% as we can. And that in doing that, what we're doing is looking at the fire through multiple wavelengths so we can get that confirmation, and also collaborating with researchers like those at Google who can use some amazing AI capabilities that will help us to reduce those false positives. And that's where really this is truly an alliance where we'll be able to benefit from the expertise and capabilities of others as well. And as was mentioned, our first protoflight satellite was launched on March 14th. We were very excited. I have not held my breath like that in a very long time. but it has done everything it should do so far. It's been behaving amazingly so far. It's what is on the prototype is a fully capable sensor suite that we have designed specifically for fire detection alongside our technical partners, Muon Space. And it does not have the real-time antennas, so it's not bringing data down in real time yet. But it is doing everything else that the system should be doing. And we are already on the pathway to build the first 3 operational satellites, which will be bringing data down real time. And they're looking to be launched mid next year. We have some images though from the proto flight, and this is what's getting us very excited. You know, the requirement from the agencies was that we'd be able to see fires while they're still small. And I think even with the first images that we're receiving, we're seeing that that is possible with FireSat. So you can see here this really small spot in the environment. It was a very small, very low intensity fire in June in Oregon. It was by the side of a road, so it actually got called in pretty quickly, which was very lucky, and was put out very quickly. But from what we've heard from people on the ground, it never reached more than half an acre. So it gives you an idea that we'll be able to see fires at low intensity, very small. And this particular fire, from what we know, was not detected by any other space-based systems. So that's really exciting for us. The other thing that is exciting about the images that are coming down from FireSat so far is that what we were asked for is that we want to be able to monitor multiple fires over a large area. In Australia in particular, we have very large jurisdictions, hundreds of thousands to millions of square kilometers. And what we want to be able to do is provide a situational awareness tool where you can understand all of the fires in your region all of the time. And this gives us an indication of how that's going to work. You can see here an image from Australia in the Northern Territory, and you can see multiple fires here in the landscape. And we're able to pick out details of the fire line, plus the cooler parts in the center. And this was a great time to take pictures in Northern Territory because it is on that, it was in July on that cusp between the cultural burning practices and the start of the fire season. And so we've been able to pick some really great, very large, but low intensity fires. So it just gives you an idea of the scale in which this system will be able to give situational awareness. And then the third image was an interesting one. This one was taken in Canada in June. We all know that Canada has had some really big fires recently. And what we were able to see here on the top image was a very large, very intense active fire. We've actually designed our sensors so that we're able to see very small, low intensity fires and very large intensity fires and still be able to pick out the detail. It doesn't get overexposed. So we're able to see a lot of detail in that fire of which parts were most intense. But what was really interesting was what we were also able to see with the long wave infrared band that we have is this other, you can see in the orange marking, and this was actually a burn scar from 5 years ago. And we did talk to people on the ground who were part of this fire, and they said that the fire that came through 5 years ago was so intense that the vegetation has not come back yet. So it still reads very hot in our sensors. So this kind of information is very useful for warning communities and for also making operational decisions, because, you know, from an operational standpoint, if you have a fire, but all of the area to the west of it has very little vegetation, then you know that that's going to be a natural blocker for fire. And you can focus your efforts on the east side, and you can help communities understand a little more detail about how that fire might run. And you can use other tools to really get a picture of the fire broader than just that the fire is there. So really, what we're excited about is that we can give a level of dynamics and dimension to the fire and the fire behavior, and not just information on a hotspot. What we are aiming for is to build very basic data products that are designed for interoperability with what agencies are already using. And we're not here to replace any of the other platforms. What we will be doing is working with those that build platforms and have warning systems like Google to make sure that our data is providing accurate information into those tools. But we're also going to create some basic tools for the fire community Obviously, on the left here, you can see the fire perimeter. That's a really important tool for warning communities and understanding whether the fire is on one side of a highway or the other, or one side of a river or the other. The second part is the fire radiative power. You can, in this simulation, you can see that we'll be able to tell the fire community how intense parts of the fire are, and that'll give an indication of how quickly that part of the fire might move. And then the third, also linked to that, is how quickly fire has progressed over time over the series of images we've been able to take from the satellite. And that gives an indication also of how quickly and in what direction the fire is moving. And the last, obviously, a very basic tool that we plan to provide to agencies is the moment we detect a hot spot and we can confirm it, they will receive that information as quickly as possible. And these tools are designed to really meet all of the agencies where they're at. We are aware that in different countries, different agencies and different fire responders are at different levels of capability. Some might have amazing analytics tools at their fingertips, some may not. And so we want to be able to provide that basic information so that everyone has an uplift and everyone has that accurate knowledge of where and when fires are starting so that they can warn the communities. So how quickly will this information be available? Well, we stood up the organization in 2024, but this is a project that has been running for 4 to 5 years. So we've done a lot of homework and now we're moving very quickly. So as mentioned, the satellite protoflight went up in March this year. We're already in the process of building the next 3 satellites, which will go up in 2026, about mid next year. And they will have a 12-hour revisit. I'll tell you a little more about that. And really, we are so grateful for all the philanthropic funding that has been enabled us to create this capability, the initial operational capability. And it's our intention to build out the full system in collaboration with multiple governments, plus the private industry, to ensure that this system is available and equitable for everyone across the globe. Very quickly, the next phase of our build out is the first 3 satellites that will be operational. What we're aiming to do is launch them in a way that there will be twice daily imagery, but you won't just be getting one snapshot of the fire. What will be happening is twice daily, you'll get 3 satellites moving over in quick succession over a region. So you'll get at least 2 to 3 snapshots of the fire. And so it gives us an idea then of how it's going to look when the full system is available, and gives a more dynamic picture of the fire. It's not just a picture that there is a fire there, but it gives an idea of what direction the fire is moving in and how quickly. And so that will really start to prepare people for that real-time information. And really, this data would not make any difference if it wasn't in the hands of those people on the ground. And so that's why we're really grateful for the early adopters who have already signed on to the program. We have multiple from Australia, from the US, and from Portugal. And those operational end users are really going to help us to ensure that that data is streamlined and can get to decision makers and those people that are warning communities as quickly as possible and in a format that is useful for their decision making. We will also be starting early adopter programs for people working in modeling. We understand that this data is going to be so useful even beyond real-time fire warnings. And we will be creating a new data set that is going to be so useful in understanding how fire behaves, what the fire impacts are on a much larger scale. And so we'll be working with some early adopter researchers that work in understanding fire behavior. And then the last early adopter program is the Pathways program, which will be those organizations and companies that already work with fire agencies and provide tools for decision making to ensure that we're streamlining the path of our data into that decision making. Our initial collection regions, not surprisingly, the real-time data that we're going to be collecting with these first 3 satellites will be in the Western US, Eastern Australia, and Southern Europe. That aligns very nicely with our fire agencies that are attached as early adopters. But we also see that there are regions in our world that are very important from a carbon and climate aspect, and they are very high risk of fire. So we will be collecting daily information on the Amazon basin, the Boreal, and Indonesia as well, that we would like to work with scientists on to ensure that this data is helping to understand fire behavior in those regions. Lastly, I would like to express my extreme gratitude to all of the Fire Alliance supporters. You know, we use the term alliance for a reason. We know that we cannot do this ourselves. We merely see ourselves as a conduit for the amazing effort and interest of all of our partners. So thank you to google.org, Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, Minderoo, Muon Space and Environmental Defense Fund, and all of the others that choose not to be mentioned. We've just, we're so grateful to have the support of all these organizations to create a public good capability. You know, this is, I'll reiterate from the beginning, this is a nonprofit endeavor. We are not here to make money. We see a gap in information, and we are grateful to have the support to be able to fill that gap. And with that, I will hand back. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Karen. There is a sneaky question here that I will just propose to you. I was just wondering if you could quickly comment on any of the barriers to accurate fire monitoring. Very thick, dark smoke, underbrush, types of terrain. Maybe just a quick comment on that.
Quick comment on that. We have multiple wavelengths. We've very specifically tuned our wavelengths, particularly with a smoke problem. So we're measuring right out to long wave IR. I probably should have had a slide there, but for time I cut it. With the intention of being able to see through smoke and some clouds as well. So that was a big requirement from the agencies, and we've tried to fulfill that. The underbrush, what we understand based on the research that we've done is that our system is sensitive enough that we should be able to see a lot of under canopy fires as well. We will know more as more images come down, but we have specifically designed this system where wherever possible, it will solve a lot of those fire detection accuracy problems. And we will be testing that as the imagery comes down.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. And what a great timeline you've got there, 2029 till 20 minutes.
We know there's a gap, so we're pushing really hard to fill that gap. And we personally do feel that if we wait too long, we're going to have such a wildfire problem that we'll be a little bit late. So pushing really hard and hoping to get the whole community behind it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you, Keir, as well, for reminding us of all the great functionality and upcoming functionality that Google has in this public information warning space. Annie, I'm going to just invite you to share your screen and come on screen as I introduce you. So next speaker is Annie Fordham, CF, who is a communications specialist with a passion for emergency public information. As a recipient of the Churchill Fellowship, Annie has traveled the world to investigate the provision of highly accessible emergency information. With over a decade experience in emergency management and an early career in journalism, Annie has developed significant insight into the communication challenges during disasters. Annie is also currently serving as the chair of the AFAC Public Information and Warnings Group for those outside Australia. That is a peak body here in our country. And she's championing evidence-based approaches to emergency information. But I will just say a huge thank you for you being here, because you are working harder than anyone to share your insights from your Churchill Fellowship. So yeah, incredibly grateful for the effort you're putting in.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. It is so wonderful to be joining you today from Whadjuk country here in Perth, Western Australia, where, as Paula mentioned, I manage the public information branch at the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, and I have a number of other hats that I wear as well, which Paula just referenced. But what I'm here to speak to you about today is about the extraordinary experience I had last year in completing a Churchill Fellowship. And what that was for me was an opportunity to spend 8 weeks traveling around the world, learning from practitioners in the emergency management space, technology, research. And my intent really in traveling around the world, and what I did was travel to Switzerland, the US, New Zealand, and Japan. My intent was to really explore one fundamental question, and that was about how we can make emergency warnings more truly effective and accessible to everyone. So today, I really want to share a few highlights of what I discovered and some insights that I think for me have challenged the way that I think about technology in disasters. And it is a nice little full circle moment today because I've got Jeanette and Kia, both of whom were really helpful to me during the course of my research. So it's really great to be on the panel with them today. So a little bit about me before I start and a bit of personal context. I've spent more than a decade working in emergency management here in Australia. Like many of you, I've seen the benefits of technology when it comes to communicating with people in disasters. And I've also seen some of the challenges that arise with the use of technology. So the Churchill Fellowship really gave me the chance to explore some of those themes and to understand what agencies and experts around the world are doing to overcome these. I started off traveling to Switzerland to get a global perspective. I visited the UN. They were really accommodating and talked about the Early Warnings for All initiative and some other global issues in this space. And I traveled to the US to meet a whole range of different people, from people in the research community to people in the tech industry, Google, Apple, the major tech companies, as well as some smaller operators as well. I met with a lot of agencies, but I also met with people who have been personally affected by disasters. So it's a really big range of views and perspectives that I was able to get. What became clear to me, and this is a really simple slide here, but before I dive into technology and get into some of the detail of that, I just wanted to really establish the foundation of all of this, which is that everybody deserves the right to information during disasters. It's not a luxury. It's not something that only applies to some people. Everybody deserves that, regardless of their ability, their circumstance, their language background, whatever barriers might be in their way to receiving that information. It's our responsibility to try to address those barriers. That is a core principle. But as we know, tech is a huge part of what we do. It's evolving really quickly. And more than anyone, I'm involved in this space. So this certainly is not a presentation about why technology is a bad thing. Technology is absolutely critical. I work for an agency that is in many ways really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with technology. And that's a really exciting thing to be involved in. But there is always this little reality check about knowing that disasters can affect that very technology that we're trying to reach people with. And what are we doing in terms of building redundancies and having other mechanisms to get information to people when the technology just can't do what we need it to do. And I've already heard a few people reference the importance of trust, and that is something I spend a lot of time talking about, because regardless of, we can have the most amazing technology in the world, but if people don't trust the source of that information or the information itself, then the technology is basically worthless, because people are not going to act on that information. So trust is absolutely critical and something that we can't forget. Having said all that, a trip around the world to see what people are doing in the warning space is obviously going to result in some very, very cool technological solutions that I got to see and experience. One of the examples I wanted to give today was in Japan. They have an automated drone-based tsunami warning system. So for anyone who hasn't heard about this, it's a really interesting project, fully automated. So when a tsunami warning is issued, a fleet of drones is automatically dispatched to the affected area to broadcast audio instructions to the community. The cool thing about this, because when I first saw it, I went, that's cool, but what if connectivity is down, etc. It operates on a separate internal Wi-Fi network, so it can actually work when main public communication systems are down. So even the smartest automation, it has to be built with this redundancy in mind, and that's what I really like about this particular solution. The next project I want to talk about was in Switzerland. Jeanette also already spent some time talking about AI in translation and other parts of emergency messaging. In Switzerland, they are running a project to develop and test a way of automatically converting warnings into simple language and other alternate languages and sign language. So, obviously AI has huge potential in helping us to get information translated into different formats, languages, etc., to make it more accessible. But it does also introduce a significant risk. You know, it can help us do things at scale really, really quickly. But the clear message that I continue to hear from the people who are involved in this space is that AI is not there yet. It requires a whole lot of human oversight, and not just for accuracy, but also to maintain cultural relevance. There's a lot of factors that may affect people's ability to understand and act on information, and it's not just to do with a direct translation into their language. So links with cultural groups, cultural leaders, trusted voices must always be part of the equation. And that brings me to the core message really of my presentation today, and that is that technology is a fantastic tool. It can do so much. And again, I want to acknowledge those who are working in this space, Kia and her team, all of the technology experts that I met with as part of my research. There is some incredible work happening, and I'm so excited to see where it goes. But for those of us in the emergency management space, technology is a tool to help us get messages to people. It should not be our sole strategy. The most effective systems that I encountered really understood that technology is at its best when it strengthens those human connections and supports those human connections. It's not designed to replace them. And it's also designed with accessibility and redundancy in mind. And Jeanette shared some really, really great data in her presentation. My presentation is more based, my research, I should say, is purely based on really in-depth conversations and exploration of questions with people who have been involved in this space and have a lot of depth of experience. One of those people is a guy called Kelly McKinney, who some of you may have heard of or may even know. Kelly is a really experienced emergency management expert in the city of New York, a former deputy commissioner of the Office of Emergency Management there. He really emphasised and summed up the challenge of technology and echoes the sentiments that I heard from a lot of people. And when he said, we're always looking for technology to fix our problems, but it will fail you just when you need it the most, because that's what technology tends to do. We cannot lose sight of the human piece. I want to show you a quick example of what this looks like in practice. This picture is from the New South Wales floods in 2022, which Andrew referenced earlier. This is the reality of when tech goes down. Roads are underwater, power grids have failed, cell towers are down. I was lucky is probably not the word, but I was deployed to New South Wales as a public information officer during that event. It was an incredible learning experience. It was a really, really difficult time for the communities involved, and to some extent that recovery is still underway. But at the height of this incident, multiple communities were isolated for days, weeks on end. In these moments, redundancy and human networks are really the only lifelines. So in this instance, what we ended up having to do was working with our Defence Force colleagues, providing physical information to people, loading flyers onto helicopters, delivering them by hand to let people know what was going on. And these images are not, they're not from decades ago. This is from, 3 years ago now. Technology, unfortunately, has a habit of failing when we need it the most when it comes to emergency management. And they're not hypothetical scenarios. This is just an operational reality for us. Yet how many of our strategies really have backups? Sometimes that direct physical communication is the only opportunity we have to get information to people. So we really need to think about what we are doing, mapping those partnerships and those relationships outside of active emergencies, so that when these situations happen, we're not scrambling trying to figure out what we're going to do. Again, the answer is not let's abandon technology. It's really let's build some systems that work with technology, but also work when technology is not working for us. So during my travels, I also learned about a whole lot of low-tech, what I call low-tech solutions, which are working really effectively. And these really shouldn't be overlooked. One of those was Japan's tsunami flag system. It's a standardized flag that is used at 70% of the country's beaches because it's been that effective. After the 2011 earthquakes, they realized that there were a whole lot of reasons why people may not hear tsunami sirens. simply that you can't really hear very well over wind and waves if you're in the water. And as well, you know, people who may have difficulties hearing anyway, hearing impairments, etc., they needed a way to visually get that information to people who may be out in the water, you know, not looking at a phone or some other device. So they developed these flags in consultation with the communities impacted. And it's been that successful that they're using it at almost all of their beaches. So it's very simple, it's visual, works in all conditions. Sometimes the answer is just not to overthink it. That was you know, I really enjoyed hearing about that one. In New Zealand, they're really big on community connection, community hubs that are sort of known places for communities to go during emergencies, where they can seek information. Local radio, trusted community leaders, sometimes can prove more reliable than sophisticated digital systems. And there are a number of case studies in my research report that speak to that point. So low-tech and high-tech solutions are really not competitors, they're partners, and we need to remember that and design our systems with that in mind. My call to action really is, if all the tech fails tomorrow, how are you going to reach the communities that you serve? Who's going to carry that message? And are people going to trust on it? And if we can't answer those questions clearly, then there's work and there's thinking to do there. Another point I just wanted to quickly touch on was about how we engage with the tech sector, because like I said before, there are so many people doing such wonderful work in this space. We really need to think about engaging with the tech sector in a more flexible way. And what I mean by that is, and I'm sure it's this way in other countries, when government agencies are trying to develop technical solutions, often there's a lot of bureaucratic processes and procurement processes and hoops you have to jump through, which all makes sense because, you know, we're spending taxpayers' money and we have to make sure we spend it responsibly. But there are also ways that we can engage more flexibly and really approach the tech sector with problem rather than a prepackaged solution. You know, it's less about we need X and more about how can we solve X, and let the people who have that technological expertise propose those solutions. The example you see on the screen is what we called the Emergency WA Hackathon. And this was an event that we ran over a weekend to develop some ideas to address some of the really difficult problems that we have been having in Western Australia with communicating emergency information. So we brought in a whole lot of university students, tech experts, and people who are really enthusiastic about generative AI, etc. And we threw a whole lot of problems at them, and we said, please, you know, blank slate, come up with some solutions. I don't care if it's an app or a website or whatever you think the solution might be to this problem. Give us those ideas. And we offered prizes, and we sort of made it a fun weekend that people could come along and just really try and tackle some of these really difficult problems. And we ended up, the winning team actually designed an automated evacuation route planning tool, which we then funded as a working prototype. We haven't used it in the real world as such as yet. There's a lot more research and testing that needs to happen with that. But it was really exciting to see what's possible when you throw those ideas out there and you say, hey, you guys are the experts, tell us what you think is possible here. So that was really a mindset shift for me, I think. And it's about focusing on the problem without jumping to solutions, not making assumptions about what technology can do for us, but letting the technology sector tell us what it can do for us. Engaging earlier, more regularly, and like I said before, instead of saying we need this, it's about asking how can we solve this problem. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, just a few key principles, and that is to always, you know, something I always have in the back of my mind is everybody deserves the right to emergency information, regardless of who they are, where they come from. Technology is a tool. It's a great tool that we have at our disposal, but it is not the only strategy. And when engaging with the tech sector, let's focus on the problems, not jump straight to products and solutions. I will leave it there. There is a last slide, which has a QR code to download my full report and some contact details if anyone would like to reach out. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Annie. And again, you're doing the hard yards to make sure that all of this research is translated and made utilizable by end users across the world. So, you know, we have shared problems. Agencies across the world, the whole sector has shared problems. So why not work together to come up with shared solutions? Thank you so much. It's a fantastic tool. I've actually stolen it for mine. So thanks, Annie. All right. So now it is my awkward pleasure to introduce myself as the next speaker. The purpose of my presentation today is threefold. First, I'll give you a little bit of background on why I have any credibility to be standing in front of you today at this forum. Second, I will introduce you to and provide some detail about the project that sits behind this forum today. And third, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into some preliminary insights in a work package that is literally live now. We are analysing now. So I reserve the right to retract any statement I make about those insights in case they change as we get more data in. So a little bit of background about myself. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an associate professor at the Queensland University of Technology here in Brisbane, Australia. And I have been working in the disaster communication domain for about 11 years now across 3 large streams of research. So the first one is looking at optimizing official warnings. So we saw Jeanette talk about optimizing those short form messaging, but I've done a lot of work around optimizing long form and short form messaging and helping to shape in Australia a national doctrine around what words to include, what content, very similar to the things that Jeanette was talking about, but in the US context. So the warning lexicon that Jeanette shared, that's very similar to our public information and warnings handbook and the choosing your words documentation that ADA supplies. Another stream of research that I focus on is conflicting cues. So this idea that you could have the most optimized emergency warning going out into the public, but there's so much else that the community looks to for information, a lot of noise, and that can introduce conflict. So one of the challenges agencies had was we send out these flood warnings saying to evacuate or prepare to evacuate. People look outside and it's a sunny day and they think, I can't see the hazard, so I'm not going to act. But beyond environmental cues, there's also noise from media and peers, neighbors, what are they doing, and third parties. So if they're saying something in conflict with what agencies are saying, that's when we see people not act or delay action. And as part of that conflicting cues research, we also found that one of the critical sources of conflicting cues was in visuals. So the use of inappropriate, doctored, or problematic images. You can briefly see on the conversation article there's some examples of images that were circulated in events around the world that were either manipulated, or a really big challenge for agencies was seeing images being used from past events recirculate in current events, and the risks didn't match, which really confused the public on what actually was the risk, how severe was it, and what action should I take. So we looked at how do we manage those problematic visuals, how do we empower agencies to do it, but also how do we look at a journalist's role in order to identify when an image is problematic, whether it's fake or misinformation or disinformation, to stop them amplifying it as well. Which leads to the third stream of research, which is looking at the use of visuals in emergency communication. So it's all well and good to have the text, but we know a lot of the time it is paired with some kind of imagery. So beyond the static images, we've also got the use of videos. Fantastic tool for emergency comms. We've done research looking at what a video needs to include to educate the public about a particular hazard, to show the risk. So when they do receive a warning and they look outside and they can't see the threat, these videos can help show, no, really, here's where the fire is, we're on the ground, this is coming for you. So that helps ping risk, and then that can hopefully trigger protective action. And the third thing we looked at, well, how do you design a video in such a way that it creates a social norming effect? So it shows you what protective action to take, shows you how to do it, and then you follow along as a community member. And another visual that we commonly see, and you've seen across all the slides in previous presentations, is the use of maps. So we've got a project also funded by NHRA looking at predictive mapping for bushfires. I highly recommend you check it out. I've got a link at the end, which has brought up some insights that really overlap with this project today, which brings me to, why does this project exist? So the Multi-Hazard Public Information and Warnings Platforms of the Future project was really born out of a recommendation that came out in a recent Royal Commission. A Royal Commission, if you're not from Australia, is a federal investigation, usually to resolve something that went wrong or didn't work the way it should, and they investigate that and set out a series of recommendations. And the relevant recommendation here was that Australia needs a national warnings platform. So while every state and territory has their own apps, their own, website platforms that you can see on the screen here, they're calling for one where all of those plug into a national system. Now, that was largely a trigger or a consequence, I should say, of the 2019-2020 horrific bushfire season that we had here in Australia, where a real pain point for communities and for agencies was the limits of their platforms. So it would show a fire is moving from one state and then it would stop at the border on that particular jurisdiction's platform. And you might look at it and think, oh, that's the fire edge. But then you go onto the other state's platform and say, oh, no, it's still raging on the other side. Having a national platform is a way to overcome issues like that, to look at where are all the floods and fires and other hazards happening across the country, especially in a day and age where we have compounding, cascading, concurrent hazards occurring, which are having impacts. You could have a cyclone up north, which is then going to cause flooding down south. But without knowing what's going on up north and having that connection, you might not have a community that's as informed. So as a consequence of this external environment, these Royal Commission recommendations, Caitlin Sampson, Carla Mooney and Rachel Guy came forward and put a project towards NHRA, and we were fortunate enough to be the research team successful to execute. So our research team is made up of a consortium of universities led out of Queensland University of Technology, and we also have RMIT, University of Tasmania and Monash University, each bringing very specific subject matter expertise on investigating specific community cohorts, whether it's those living with accessibility challenges, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, communities living in rural regional areas, and also communities that have some literacy challenges, as well as having cartography expertise, because maps are such a critical part of the platform design. But who I haven't mentioned there yet is Chloe from CFA Victoria. So why have we got an end user and agency representative embedded in the core research team? Because we are doing this entire project by true, authentic co-design. Chloe's entire job in this project is to call out what does this mean for agencies in practice, to make sure that we're creating research that's not a doorstop, but is in fact translatable and able to be used by practitioners. And if you want to learn more about a really remarkable case on co-design, please do check out those articles that I have mentioned there. But again, it's not just the research team. We also have a larger steering committee, which has great subject matter expertise from across the country, who again, we report to every fortnight to make sure that they have input in design, sense making of results, and we are able to deliver. So collectively, we agreed on the broader research program being led by this overarching project aim. So we want to understand how these multi-hazard platforms are contributing to public safety within a far broader risk comms framework. We know there are other sources out there. All the speakers prior have discussed that. And then we also want to look at, what does the future look like? And is it changing? And what can we do to be, future-proofing the decisions we make today? This is not the exact research question. I smooshed 4 together for the sake of, making space on the slide. But effectively, we're trying to answer the research questions of, how do the communities currently use them? What value are they getting out of them? How could they be optimized in their design based on what's currently being used? And what design principles could we offer should the government come out and say, okay, well, we're actually going to build this national platform? And these are going to be universally applicable for any country that is currently looking at the integration of that end-to-end that Jeanette talked about right at the beginning, but definitely having that community-facing aspect to the platform. But what's really key, again, about this co-design process is we are not just here to bring just the community voice, here's what the community wants, but we also need to be cognizant at the same time of what makes business sense for agencies and what is technically feasible to do. So it's great to hear from people like Karen talking about all these great new affordances that technology offers. We have designed the program across 4 phases. Co-design, while it seems like that phase is done, it of course continues throughout the life of the project. And under the research aim, it was really important to identify what were some core knowledge gaps that existed. And what we identified was at the outset of the project, and we're slowly getting answers to these as we work through, but where does a platform fit in that ecosystem? Are people going to it first? Are they listening to it second? What are they using it for? Do they understand when that platform is showing multiple events that have multiple calls to action, some of which may be related, some might have nothing to do with one another? What does it look like when information from that platform is then republished on another third-party platform? Is it introducing conflict? Is the symbology the same? Is there confusion around some of the visuals that are used within that platform? Are people using it just because they want to hear about a fire event? Or are they also using it because they want to hear about a tree over the road? And what education needs to sit behind it? Jeanette made a great example of how when people heard they could opt back into WEARS, that was a good educative opportunity. But then we also want to understand how are community preferences evolving through time and what affordances are being made available based on not just tech, but like Annie said, these partnerships, changes in legislative arrangements, data sharing, things like that. So the second phase of research, I will go into more depth with shortly because that's the phase we're in now. And I have a call to you to find out how you can get involved. Phase 3 is our empirical research. So next year, all of the university teams are going to be in the field conducting 5 studies, talking directly to community about current and future platform design and practice. And then, of course, as I've repeatedly mentioned, we have built in specifically a phase to look at how do we utilize this research. So let's look at phase 2, our systematic review. When we brought the team together, we've all got such an extensive history. I think it's a collective 30 years of experience working in the disaster comms space. And we've got a lot of these public and like non-public reports that we could pull together to start answering those knowledge gaps. But to do it quite systematically, we've taken a 2-step approach. We are currently analysing the academic literature, and we are calling for you to contribute to the grey literature. So we have done in the academic side, using a variation on that search string across multiple databases, we want to know what does peer-reviewed research say over the last 10 years about community use of platforms and their design and their efficacy in encouraging protective action taking. But we don't have line of sight to what you have in your drawers, in your OneDrives, in your computer that might be research your agency has done. Because spoiler, there's not a whole lot of research that's able to look at the efficacy of a particular platform, which I know agencies are doing. We have agencies here in Australia who go out and say, okay, here's our app. How did you use it this year or last season? What features do you like? What features need to be changed? What extra push notifications do we have? So I know you have it. So if you would like to share it, and it is publicly available, please direct us to it. But also if it's non-publicly available, I can share all of the QT ethics in place for us to get access to that if you are willing to participate. But let's have a look at some of these early findings. So what I've got on the slide here is an image taken from one of the articles that is included in our data set, and it's showing you the value chain, all that end-to-end process that Jeanette mentioned, from we've sensed that a threat is imminent to now we're going to warn the public and get them to take some kind of action. And when we ran that literature search, we pulled over 9,000 articles. wild. So what was interesting was that of those 9,000, 8,000 or so of them were focused on that detection, sensing, modeling end of the value chain, with very few focused on here's a community-facing platform and here's what where it fits in the ecosystem and what people think about it. With that in mind, it was really interesting to sift through the stuff that we were ultimately removing from our data set, because it became apparent that there's this increasing trend to connect the consumer or the community member directly with some of this sensor technology. And it's happening in a couple of ways. Either the community member, the individual, has taken it on themselves to build their own weather system or put their own sensors out on their property or in their community, and they're using that information to then make sense of it themselves and take action. Or we're seeing an increase in citizen science involvement in these early stages of this value chain. So we're questioning at the moment, are we going to see a future where we have people, community members, connected directly to that sensor, which again, Jeanette alluded to. But I think what we learned very, very quickly as a team was that we are going to struggle to get a sense of what the risk ecosystem looks like, because every single study has asked different item questions. They've analyzed interview data really differently. What am I talking about? Look at the slide here. Just some examples, not throwing shade at any of the authors of these papers. I could have screenshot some of my own work, but what they've done is they've conflated source, channel, and platform. So what we see a lot of is results saying 97% of people told us that they heard a warning from a mobile phone. That is not specific enough. What were you doing on that mobile phone? Was it a push notification? Was this a WIA, that was automatically sent to your phone? Were you on an app? Were you on social media? Were you on WhatsApp? By getting a more granular understanding of where information is coming from will be more helpful into the future. So we're hoping to look at how can we build out this sort of standardized scale so people can actually put this into all of their surveys and make sure we're asking about source, or we're asking about channel, or we're asking about a platform, because it is going to make comparison a little bit more challenging. However, of the articles that did focus on platforms, we're seeing 3 types of platforms effectively emerge, all with different jobs to be done. The first is an alert-based platform. The goal is to make people aware something's happening. The next is an official public information warnings platform. So like a specific hazard agency, it's their platform, irrelevant of what country you're in, there's somebody in charge. And if they have a platform, people are going there to verify what they've either heard in the alert or verify the threat and look at advice on what they should do. The third type of platform there is relational. So that's a platform like social media, where people are going to engage in not one-way communication, but two-way communication, where they can make sense of the situation. They can amplify messaging. They can, but also do some kind of verification. However, what we are seeing again is a trend towards the introduction of third parties in this space. So Flood Map, Waze, Google Maps offering the information is doing the same job to be done for the individual, and we might actually see community members preferencing that over the official source. And then you go over the official platform. And then when you look at alerts, we recently here in Queensland had an earthquake, and Android phone users were alerted to it. Android is not our leading science organization here for telling us about earthquakes, nor is it the organization that tells us what we should do about it. So while in theory, someone should get an alert, go to the official platform, and then go to the relational platforms, instead, it's a little bit more of a choose your own adventure. So as we move forward, I suspect we're going to have recommendations around, if you're going to build a platform or look at your platform currently, you need to understand, what is it offering the community? Who else is offering that to the community? And if they're using those platforms over yours, what can you do about it? And then another critical part of platforms is the use of visuals. So what's going to be an enduring challenge for agencies is that most platforms typically rely on a map showing you where the multi-hazards are. Now, with that, there is a lot of heavy lifting being done by the community to read the map. Not everybody has the same map literacy. And then you add a hazard over the top, they don't always know how the hazard works. Some people can very clearly look at that and say, here's where the fire is, but I understand the topography of the base map. So I know the fire is going to go this way relatively quickly because there's, certain hills there, or it's not going to cross over here because there is a gully or a river. So with that in mind, there's a lot of cognitive load for the individual when they're looking at these. Then you add another layer of different icons. Quick note, Australia has resolved a lot of the cognitive load for when it comes to iconography, warning level, and colors, because we have a standardized approach for all hazards. So if you're getting an advice warning for a cyclone, it's going to have very similar call to action to an advice warning for a fire, and it's all the same symbols, all the same colors. Not everybody is in that same position. And I did want to flag, in case Jeanette didn't bring it up, but she did, her recent work on opting out, and this idea that if you have a platform that's offering push notifications to the community, do they understand how to change those push notifications? Are they getting so many notifications because you've got multiple hazards on there that they're getting tree over the road, there's someone dangerous over there, there's a fire, there's a flood, there's some smoke, there's a hazardous chemical material, because they will become fatigued and they could eventually opt out of that platform. And then finally, I just wanted to make a comment on some emerging insights that we're having about the future of public information and warnings. It's really easy to answer this question and be like, tech is the future. So it's really nice to have Annie reinforce that message that it is a tool, it's not the solution. There is always going to be a place for the bottom line there, which is your traditional sources, people talking to each other, doing door knocking, having signs, as opposed to just the digital channels or the platforms right at the top there. And there's some quite futuristic looking examples coming out of the research. But the future of public information and warnings is entirely dependent on the community, who's receiving it, what level of maturity their systems are at the moment. Because if they don't have a telecommunications system that's working, you've pretty much knocked out the top two rows there. But also, what is the job to be done? Where is there a gap in warning your regional communities, or a gap in warning your cities that are densely populated? And when you know the job to be done, you can find the right fit for purpose platform or channel to use. But there has to be redundancies in place, because if people are choosing not to go to the official source through their platform, app, or channel, how is that information getting out? So thank you so much for my presentation. It is available on NHRA's website. You can look at the QR code just like Annie did to get information on how to connect with this project, but also the predictions in public one that I mentioned. And so far in our webinar today, we have one more presentation, and we've looked at like very specific case studies of what's happening in Switzerland, the US, what this project's doing, what Google's doing, third parties are doing. But now I want to turn to our next speaker and say, we need now a more global perspective here. So I am going to invite Jochen Luther, who is from the World Meteorological Organization. So as I welcome Jochen today, when we first spoke and I first invited him along, I said, we really need to have that global lens of what is happening globally for public information and warnings, especially in light of early warnings for all. So let me just take a moment to read Jochen's biography. He is a technical coordinator for weather, climate, hydrological, marine, and related environmental services and applications at the Secretariat of the World Meteorological Organization, a specialist agency of the UN headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. He started his role in the WMO regional office for Asia and Southwest Pacific, based in Singapore in 2023, where he is also the regional WMO focal point for the UN Early Warnings for All initiative.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation and the kind introduction and this opportunity to present the Early Warnings for All initiative to you on behalf of the World Meteorological Organization and the Early Warnings for All Pillar Leads. I hope I'm audible. And before I want to introduce this initiative, I just want to give you a brief introduction to the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. Of course, this presentation is a little bit different than the previous ones because, as Paula said, I want to present the global perspective, but I think everything that was presented before really fits nicely into this framework. And as she said, the WMO is a specialized agency of the UN. It's the UN system's authoritative voice on weather, climate, and water issues. And we are actually one of the oldest international organizations because obviously weather, climate, water, and ocean issues do not know borders. So it was recognized very early on, 1873, that it would be worthwhile to create a mechanism to coordinate the exchange of billions of data from billions of stations, that observations that are collected on the ground, in the upper air, by ships, by airplanes, from satellites, from radars, and so on. And it has formed into the WMO into 1950, when it also joined the UN. And since then, of course, with technology, we've seen really so much growing computational power and so much research that resulted in really the exchange of billions and billions of terabytes every day that enables weather and climate forecasting. And also, we also host the IPCC that was created in 1988, and many other programs. And we also help countries to improve their capacities in observations, in modeling, in forecasting, and in service delivery. So at the moment, we have more than 150 million US dollars worth of projects ongoing all over the world, mainly in LDCs and SIDS. And our vision is that by 2030, we see a world where all nations, especially the most vulnerable, are more resilient to the socioeconomic consequences of extreme weather, climate, water, and other environmental events, and underpin their sustainable development through the best possible services, whether over land, at sea, or in the air. And we are a membership organization of the UN member states, and they are represented by their national meteorological and hydrological services. You can see our mandate, which is facilitating worldwide cooperation to advance the delivery and use of high quality and authoritative, and I want to underline authoritative, weather, climate, hydrological, and related environmental services by its members to improve the well-being of all through the exchange of data, information products, standardization, very important, the standardization of observations, applications, research, and training. And we do this along this hydrometeorological warning chain. Paula already alluded to it, which starts from the observations and goes to the modeling, simulation, reanalysis of data, to the forecasting, and to the service delivery that then will have a socioeconomic benefit that helps improve sustainable development. And all this is underpinned by research, technology, data processing, and data management, and enablers such as standards, quality management, partnerships, capacity development, user engagement, feedback from these users, and continuous monitoring and evaluation and improvement. So, and as Annie said, actually, warning or information is a human right. And for us, the underlying observations are really a global public good and a critical infrastructure. So if we go to the next slide, please. Last slide on the WMO. It's just to show you that we have 193 members, and we implement our vision and our strategic plan through programs which are both operational, so infrastructure services, but also research. So we have the World Climate Research Program, World Weather Research Program, and so on. And these members are organized in 6 regions, and the Secretariat, the headquarters, is based in Geneva in Switzerland, also has regional offices that serve mostly these regional regional associations and the members in these regions. And I am based here in the regional office for Asia and Southwest Pacific in Singapore. But why do we need the global initiative like Early Warnings for All? I think you all know that in many reports you see all the damage and the losses of life that disasters cause, and about 90% of all these disasters are usually triggered by hydrometeorological hazards. And here I'm just picking out one of our flagship products, which are the annual State of the Climate reports, both on the regional and on the global level, which every year actually show the dramatic consequences of climate change. So especially 2024 was the hottest year on record in many regions and globally as well, often surpassing the 1.5 degrees already. And they also spell out some of the impacts. So for example, in the Philippines, we had unprecedented tropical cyclone activity with a lot of damage. In Asia, we had very, very devastating floods in Nepal and Bangladesh. Also, heat waves are an increasing problem. So just to say that we need to act, and early warning seems to be one of the easier to achieve measures compared to like structural measures. Next one. And another reason is that it is really proven that an early warning can reduce on the one hand, the damage by 30% in this case, or according to this study, but especially the death toll. So the reduction in mortality is typically linked to improved early warning systems. And this can be demonstrated, for example, by cyclones in the Bay of Bengal, where in 1970, the cyclone Bola caused 300,000 deaths. And even in 2008, Cyclone Nargis caused 140,000 deaths. But a similar cyclone in 2023, Cyclone Mocha, really similar in strength and landfall and everything, it caused 500 deaths and 500,000 were evacuated in time. So I think we really can see an improvement. This is what countries report, what they self-report, with all the flaws that come with self-reporting. But countries report, this was in 2022, 2023, that only half of them are covered by early warning systems. And when you look at the LDCs, it's even less, 46%. And in the SIDS, it's even less, 39%. I want to just quickly say that it's actually not easy to define an early warning system and therefore to measure coverage or measure progress. So after the Sendai framework was adopted, UN member states came up with a nice definition here in blue, which kind of touches upon these 4 pillars of an early warning system. However, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. An early warning system is it produces early information, but what does early mean? It can mean from minutes to decades, as you can see on the right. Some hazards or changes, they can only be visible after decades, like a sea level rise. Others, like lightning, are a matter of minutes. But of course, uncertainty also increases with as we go further into the future. Also, the warning. We just heard that there are authoritative warnings, but there are also a lot of non-authoritative warnings. Some of them have a legal backing or issued in a good legal framework. Others are more advices or advisories without a lot of legal issues attached to it. And lastly, it's a very complex system of systems, from observation systems, communication systems, emergency management systems, and so on. So it's actually very difficult to monitor this. So what is the Early Warning for All initiative then? It's a global initiative that aims to protect everyone everywhere by 2027. And it was launched by the UNSG in 2022 because he was not happy, and many of us are not happy, that the progress with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the Sendai framework targets, and of course with the Paris Agreement, is not at all on track. We're lacking so far behind, so that he created this acceleration agenda. And it's important to note that Early Warnings for All is not a new or standalone program or project. It's really a campaign to bring everyone together to work in a different way to achieve this ambitious aim. And it builds on a lot of other initiatives and early warning conferences that really laid the groundwork for this initiative. And it is built on these 4 pillars of an early warning system. So from disaster risk knowledge to the detection, observation, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting of hazards, to the warning dissemination, communication, and very importantly, of course, preparedness and response capabilities in the communities. And you have 4 global organizations leading on each pillar: the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction on Pillar 1, World Meteorological Organization for Pillar 2, International Telecommunication Union on Pillar 3, and the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies leading on Pillar 4. And as important as each pillar are also the inter-pillar domains, which are, for example, good governance, policy, legislation, then stakeholder coordination and partnerships. No agency can deal with this alone, not at the local level, not at the global level. Advocacy and awareness. We constantly need to raise awareness of the benefits of investing in these systems. Investing leads me to another one is finance and good planning. So we constantly need to mobilize domestic and international finance to maintain and improve these systems. And of course, we need to monitor and evaluate and also simulate the system regularly. And overall, cross-cutting is, I think, this move towards impact-based forecasting and warning services. So to really not only say there will be this much millimeters of rain, but what will this rain actually do? What is the impact? What are the actions that can be taken? And also, when we look at anticipatory action, so a new financing, which is disaster risk financing, which is actually based on the forecasts, that's also a cross-cutting area. And these actions need to happen at all the levels and across these domains, from technical and scientific work, financial, and the political commitment. So what did we do after this call for action by the UNSG? We quickly contacted the other agencies, UNDRR, ITU, IFRC, and drafted a high-level action plan, which was published the same year. An advisory panel was created with representatives from many other UN agencies and also the private sector. A coordination mechanism was established, which drafted a programmatic framework, a lot of tools and guidance, an M&E framework. They are working on a maturity index to say where a country is at with regards to its early warning system. Drafting a lot of progress reports for each COP, and also working on communication and resource mobilization strategies. And at the regional level, so we have a lot of regional offices of these organizations here in Singapore, in Bangkok, in Jakarta. We kind of mirror this and break it down to the regional circumstances. So for example, in the Southeast Asian region with ASEAN, there's a strong partner, very important political partner, where we integrate these ideas into their work programs. And also in the Pacific, there's the Weather Ready Pacific program of the Secretariat, the Regional Pacific Environment Program, SPREP, which was already identified by the ministers as a key vehicle for early warnings for all in the Pacific. And below you can see some of the partners, not all of them, that are really important beyond these pillar lead partners. To start, the UNSG sent letters to 30 countries in 2023, actually, which were selected based on their risk, but also their capacity that they reported. 6 of them are in Asia, 5 of them are in the Pacific, and they were to receive targeted support by these international partners. You can actually see the core of this initiative, which is of course at the national level, and the main product, let's say, of this initiative is on the lower right. These national roadmaps for early warning system strengthening, or early warning for all roadmaps, which are really cross-cutting plans, which are costed, budgeted, and which identify responsibilities, which identify targets, which identify ongoing projects, but also gaps, areas which are not yet covered by any government program or international program. And to come up with these roadmaps, there's a really inclusive participatory process is necessary to really have an inclusive product that everyone owns and that the country really takes as its own. And so some of the steps involved were appointing focal points from the government, from the UN country teams, linking it to things like NDCs or national adaptation plans, holding many consultation workshops, conducting gap analysis for each of the pillar, and setting up or using existing coordination mechanisms. And this toolkit that the interpillar coordination mechanism developed really helped with that, and it is available to everyone to use. These are tools. This is the programmatic framework that I mentioned, which really details for each pillar some generic outcomes and some generic activities that need to be undertaken to achieve early warnings for all in a specific country. And you can go to the website or scan the QR code to find out more. Here, even deeper for each pillar, there is a plethora of guidelines available, case studies, best practices, and so on, so where countries can really dig in and find more information. We also created a dashboard where you can track the progress in terms of implementation, but also in terms of capacity. And this is a very interesting tool to play around with. The next slide is another dashboard which actually tracks investments by the international community into early warning systems. At the moment, mainly the climate funds and multilateral development banks. Of course, we also have traditional reports every year, as I mentioned, usually published before the COPs. And the last one is, it's a project coordination mechanism, mainly for the Pacific, to overcome a bit this risk of having a lot of uncoordinated projects in the country and risk of duplication. This is another platform which actually shows all the warnings issued globally in the common alerting protocol format. And I think the colleagues from Google or others are really well aware of this. And yeah, it can be easily picked up because the CAP, Common Alerting Protocol messages, really have this standard format, which can be picked up by many different media. Yeah, here we can see that in 2025, almost the whole world was already able to issue warnings in this format. Just want to say that we do see positive results compared to 2022, where countries really report better risk information, more coverage with forecasts and observations. Especially in Pillar 3, we see a lot of countries now disseminating warnings in the CAP format, but also as cell broadcasts, which are these independent from SMS or whether you subscribe to something. As long as you have a phone, there will be a very annoying sound that alerts you if you are in the area. And also anticipatory action frameworks have really been doubling in many countries, and preparedness has improved. Just looking at the future, we do want more countries to benefit from this. So we're working beyond these 30 countries with other countries like Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, Iraq, Timor-Leste, and so on. We also want more partners, especially from the regional level, to join. And we want to, of course, continue mobilizing more resources and expand the donor base. But there are lots of challenges. It's sustaining momentum of this global initiatives in the countries and among the partners. There's always a risk of falling back to these more unsustainable, isolated projects and investments. Data sharing, especially in times of conflict, is always an issue. Misinformation is an issue. Competing for resources. AI, as we heard, is really revolutionizing forecasts, but also risk management overall, with all these opportunities and risks. Working with the private sector is especially important, both in terms of observations, but also service delivery. Retaining and attracting talent in the Met services also this complexity of the early warning system that needs to be conveyed. More studies are needed on socioeconomic benefits and return on investments. And this moving towards the impact-based or even impact forecasting is still a challenge. And my last slide are just some summary key takeaways that early warning systems work and they need to work for everyone. And Early Warning for All is the global initiative that is built around these 4 pillars with critical interpillar domains, and national ownership is key with inclusive governance, standard operating procedures, engagement of all the stakeholders. And early warning systems have these significant returns on investment and are the reason for the reduction in disaster mortality. But no warning can be produced without international cooperation, especially in the climate-related hazards, and no agency can do it alone. And multiple simultaneous redundant channels are needed to disseminate and communicate the warnings, and every country is invited to use these Early Warning for All rollout tools and the experiences from the initial countries to implement it in their country or in their province and so on. And especially including in middle and high income countries, because they are not exempt from the impact of natural hazards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joachim. Really appreciate that. And it's really great to hear that even at a global level, we're all rowing the boat and hopefully in the same direction. We're all facing such similar challenges. And yeah, just such an important thing to learn that Australia still needs to invest in early warnings for all. So thank you so much for your time, Joachim. I just want to thank all of the speakers today. And, you know, it was a really great time collaborating in the lead up to this onto this forum. And I would, of course, like to also thank NHRA. Andrew, thank you for your time today. Also, thank you to Ainsley, Via, and Joe, who have been great supports in today's forum. I just want to highlight that there are additional webinars coming up from NHRA. So on the 14th of October, there's the National Hazards Research Australia Disaster Challenge. And also on the 21st, there is the 2025 Disaster Challenge there. So please do stay in touch with NHRA, sign up to their newsletter, and you can also reach out to all the speakers you've heard from today via their emails, LinkedIn, or other socials to stay informed of everything that's happening in the public information warning space. Thank you so much for giving 2 hours of your time. For those watching the recording, thank you for coming back and engaging, and reach out if you have any other questions. Stay tuned for the post-event wrap-up with recording, answers to questions we didn't get to, and a written-up summary of what we discussed today. Thank you so much, everyone.